Welcome back to Tales Arcane. In this video I'm going to explain how I run a university system in 5th edition's Dungeons & Dragons. This system encompasses study and exams and also provides a very clear structure for campaigns in an academic setting. You can use this for Strixhaven or for any university setting, be it magical or otherwise. Now by the end of this video you're going to have everything you need to implement this system at your own tables, but if you do want a written version of the system, you can find that in my academic compendium on Patreon. The academic compendium is a 50-page PDF that gives you basically everything you need to run a dark academia D&D setting. And over on my Patreon you can get weekly encounters, monthly adventures and supplements like the academic compendium, and Patreon only videos. There's a link to my Patreon in the description under this video, but also just subbing to the channel and liking is also greatly appreciated. Now, let's talk about D&D University. This system is predicated on the assumption that each university term takes about 10 weeks, and it's split into two phases. We have academic week phases and weekend phases. Now during the academic week phase, the players are studying, they're maybe doing extracurriculars, joining clubs, perhaps working a part-time job, and then during the weekend phase, that's when all your classic D&D stuff happens. The players are getting together, solving campus mysteries, fighting monsters in the library, all the sort of things you might expect from a D&D game set in a university. The academic week phase passes in a kind of montage, and during that montage each player can do two things. They can firstly roll a check to find out how well they studied throughout the week, how much they learned, and they can secondly do an additional check for any kind of specific activity they wanted their character to perform throughout that week. It could be an interaction they wanted to have, they wanted to get information from one of their professors, or maybe they wanted to investigate something in the archives and find a bit of information that will help them when it comes time to carry out some more adventures during the weekend phase. That secondary activity will probably involve a bit of roleplay and then maybe a skill check to find out how successful their interaction was or their endeavour was. So if they wanted to do something interpersonal, like get some information from a fellow student, they might be rolling a charisma based check, or if they're doing something like they're investigating the archives, it's probably going to be like investigation or maybe history, and we're going to an intelligence check. But let's focus in on that first check, the one that's going to determine how well the player has done in their studies throughout the course of the week. At the start of the term, or at the start of the campaign, the players should sit down with the DM and decide what their course of study is going to be across the course of the term. Each player can focus on their own studies, but at the start of the campaign / term, the DM should assign essentially a core skill check to each course of study that the players are embarking on. So if one of the players is studying, say, the musical performing arts, each academic week they're going to have to make a performance check to determine how well they did in their studies that week. Likewise, if someone's studying theoretical magic, they might have to make an arcana check each week to determine how well they're doing in their studies. Now if they succeed in that check, they're going to get a learning point, and they put that aside and the learning points build up across the course of the term. If they fail, then they don't get anything, but they can choose, if they want to roll again and essentially sort of stay up all night studying to try and get that study point for that week. They can re-roll, and for the first and potentially second roll, the DC is always 13. 13 is the standard study DC. Now, regardless of whether or not their second roll succeeds, if they choose to make a second roll, if they choose to stay up all night and really try to make up for the fact that the rest of the week hasn't been a good study week, they take academic exhaustion, which essentially means that for the weekend phase coming, which remember is when all the kind of normal D&D action takes place, they are going to have disadvantage on whatever skill check is associated with their course. I'm jumping in here while I'm editing to correct a mistake, so I misspoke here. Academic exhaustion results in disadvantage on the ability associated with the learning skill. So if you're a bard and you've re-rolled your performance check to get that extra learning point, you'll have disadvantage on all charisma based checks until the start of the next academic week phase. That includes saving throws, attacks, anything that uses that ability as a modifier. This is important because academic exhaustion needs to be something players really want to avoid, and since most players' study skill will be associated with their character's primary ability, a wizard to intelligence, a bard to charisma, a fighter to strength, and so on, this discourages them from re-rolling too often. Now, back to the video. Over the course of a 10-week term, your average player will probably amass around 7 or 8 learning points, but they could also get a few bonus learning points as quest rewards. For example, they could find a book full of valuable information, and reading that book gives them an extra learning point. Or they could encounter someone who is very knowledgeable in their field of study, and spending an afternoon with them again gives them a little extra learning point. Either way, by the end of the term, they're going to be able to have a little collection of learning points that they can essentially spend to improve their odds of passing their exam, which we'll cover in a moment. So that is the structure that this system imposes on the campaign. We have a series of academic weeks interspersed with weekends, and during the academic week we have a brief montage in which each player makes their study or learning check to get their learning point, and can potentially engage in a small roleplay interaction to follow up on something that their character would want to follow up on during the week. Then at the weekend phase, the players are going to kind of all get together after spending the week studying, and they're all on campus together, and they're all going to have some wacky adventures, and that's where your classic D&D stuff comes in. They're getting up to hijinks, they're investigating a weird haunting in the university library. Classic D&D. Now, at the end of the 10-week term, your players are each going to sit an exam. And when that player sits the exam, you're going to make it sound epic. You're going to describe the tension beforehand, the atmosphere in the exam hall or in the practice yards where perhaps a physical performance has to take place. And the player is going to have this very kind of flavoured roleplay experience, but there's a kind of core mechanical system that's happening underneath that you as the DM will be implementing. So here is the mechanics of the exam. Firstly, you need to determine the exam DC, and we're not going to be using D20s for this. Instead, what you're going to do is you're going to sit down and roll 2d6 and add that together, and that is the exam DC. If you roll those 2d6 and they generate a number that is lower than 6, then you default the DC to 6, because anything lower than that is just too easy. Now the players come in and sit the exam, and to do so they also roll 2d6, and if the number generated beats the exam DC, they have passed their exam. But this is where the learning points come in. They can take the learning points that they've been carefully generating throughout the course of that 10-week term and spend them during the exam to buy additional dice to add to the dice that they're going to roll. They can spend 2 learning points to buy 1d4, 3 learning points to buy 1d6, all the way up to 6 learning points to buy 1d12. They can buy as many of these dice as they can using however many learning points they have, and once they've done that, they can roll all those dice in addition to the 2d6. Finally, they look at all those numbers and they take the 2 highest rolls from their 2d6 plus any other dice they've bought. They take the 2 highest rolls, add them together, and that's the number that can potentially beat the DC and pass the exam. You might be thinking, well, why don't you just use your skill check for that final exam? If you're doing a history-based exam, why not just roll a history check? Well, kind of 2 reasons. One, we're trying to avoid just using a basic skill check to make this feel like a slightly different experience to all the other times the players have been studying and using that skill check. And we're also trying to give the players this sense that by making all those little successful skill checks all the way along, they've been able to accumulate this sort of additional knowledge that they bring to bear in the final exam. And we're also doing this because doing this like dice pool system with 2d6 is fun and cool, and it works in a lot of other games, and I think it works here. Now let's put this into practice. It's exam day. You're the dungeon master, so you roll 2d6. To generate the DC, you get a 4 and a 3, and so the exam DC is 7 for this particular player. The player sits down and they have their 2d6, which they're going to roll as well, but they've also got, let's say, 8 learning points built up across the course of the term. So they're going to spend those, and they're going to buy, say, 1d6 and 1d4. So now, when they roll their dice for the exam, they're going to roll 2d6 plus 1d4 plus 1d6. The 1d6 and the 1d4 having been bought with their 8 learning points. So let's say from that they get a 6, a 4, a 3 and a 1. Well, they look across those different numbers and they add up the 2 highest, the 6 and the 4. That gives them 10. 10 beats a DC of 7. They pass the exam. That is the system, and that is the system that I'm using in my own games at the moment. I'm currently running a Strixhaven campaign, and I'm using this system to add much needed structure to what is a very formless and badly paced official Strixhaven adventure that comes with the Strixhaven book. I'm using the adventure, but I'm slotting my structure and system in over the top. I've also replaced the official Strixhaven exam system with my own, because I feel that my own just makes a little bit more sense and feels like it has a bit more of a kind of a through line mind, where the players are every week adding a little bit to their chances at that final exam. I hope that you might have a chance to use this in your own games, or at the very least that this has inspired some ideas about how you might run an exam system. As I said at the start of this video, I wrote this system as part of my academic compendium supplement, which is over on Patreon and includes a university setting, pre-written professors, fellow students, a murder mystery investigation adventure, and some terrifying monsters with some pretty cool artwork. You can get the academic compendium along with more than 800 pages of unique D&D content over on my Patreon, where I also post Patreon-only videos. Anyway, that is the video. I hope you found this useful. I hope you found it enjoyable. I hope you get the chance to run a campaign in a gothic, mysterious university setting, because I think it's just a wonderful setting to run games in, and I'm having tremendous fun at the moment running my Strixhaven campaign, although I am flavouring it with a slightly dark academia aesthetic. Anyway, I'll see you in the next video.